Hello, and welcome to Asli's Notebook. I'm Asli, and I have been thinking about how to begin this for a very long time. Not only this podcast, the writing, the books I want to create, the work I want to do, the person I am still becoming at 43. For years, I believed I needed to understand exactly how all of those things fit together before I could begin. I needed a clearer identity, a more focused niche, a better answer to the question, so, what exactly do you do? It's a question I have never found easy to answer. My career has moved through digital marketing, social media, consumer insights, marketing science, and product marketing. I have worked in agencies, nonprofits, and the gaming industry, and many more, actually. Outside work, I write about ambition, grief, identity, creativity, and the strange experience of becoming someone new while still carrying every person you used to be. My notebooks are full of things that supposedly do not belong together: product marketing frameworks, fragments about grief, ideas for fantasy worlds, observations about work, questions about ambition, plans for books I may write one day, hopefully. For a long time I assumed these were separate parts of my life. Some were professional, some were personal, some were useful, some were distractions. I thought I needed to choose which version of myself deserved to be taken seriously. This podcast exists because I no longer believe that. As's Notebook is a place for the parts of us that do not fit inside one title, for the questions that live somewhere between work and life, and for anyone beginning to suspect that their range might not be evidence of confusion, it might be the pattern. A few years ago, someone looked at my LinkedIn profile and asked me that question. So, what exactly do you do? It was meant to be helpful, but I remember feeling strangely exposed by it, because I didn't have a neat answer. I could explain what I was doing at that moment. I could describe my job title. I could list my responsibilities. But that was not really what they were asking. They were asking for the thread, the simple explanation that made the changes look intentional. And when I looked at my own career, I did not immediately see one. I saw digital marketing, and then social media, then marketing science, and then product marketing. I saw agencies, non-profit work, and games. I saw creative projects, research, data, campaigns, strategy, and teams. From a distance, it could look like someone who had not decided what she wanted to become. For a long time, I worried that was true. Every career article seemed to offer the same advice. Find your passion, choose a niche, become known for one thing, go deeper, specialize. The advice was so consistent that I rarely questioned it. I assumed the problem was me. Maybe I had not found my thing yet. Maybe I lacked focus. It might be the case. I do have ADHD. Maybe every new interest was evidence that I was avoiding commitment. But when I finally stepped back and looked at the whole picture, I began to notice something else. The roles had changed, the industries had changed, the responsibilities had grown, but the questions underneath the work were remarkably consistent. Why do people care? What creates meaning? Why does one message resonate while another disappears? What gets lost between an idea and the people it is meant to serve? How do you translate complexity into something another person can understand? How do products, stories, and experiences become part of people's lives? The thread was always there. I simply could not see it while I was standing too close. Some careers are letters, others are mosaics. You understand a letter by looking at the next step. You understand a mosaic by stepping back far enough to see the image. Maybe that is why nonlinear careers can feel so confusing while we are living them. Each piece looks separate, each change looks like a departure, each new interest feels as though it contradicts the last one, but sometimes the meaning is not contained in a single piece. It is created by the relationship between them. Range is not always a lack of direction. Sometimes range is the direction. Eventually, I found product marketing. It was one of the first roles that seemed broad enough for the way my mind works. Product marketing sits between people, products, business, culture, research, strategy, and story. It gave my analytical, creative, and strategic side somewhere to meet. It allowed me to ask questions about markets and customers while also thinking about language, emotion, and meaning. It made sense to me because I have always been drawn to the spaces between things, between data and story, between what a company wants to say and what a person is actually able to hear, between a product's features and the role it may play in someone's life. At its best, product marketing is translation. It is understanding several different worlds well enough to help them speak to one another. I love that work. But even a role as broad as product marketing could not hold every part of me. There was still the part that wanted to write about grief, the part that thought about identity and aging, the part that wondered why capable people so often feel behind, the part that wanted to explore what it means to move to another country and begin again, the part that wanted to create fantasy worlds and write stories for children, the part that wanted to make something without needing it to fit into a roadmap, a launch plan, or a quarterly objective. For years, I treated those parts of myself as side interests, things to return to when I had more time, things that mattered emotionally but perhaps not professionally, things that did not belong in the story I had learned to tell about myself. But eventually I began to wonder whether the problem was not that I had too many interests. Maybe I kept trying to fit them inside containers that were too small. Maybe the issue was not inconsistency. Maybe it was compression. I moved to Stockholm when I was 37. It was a decision my husband and I made together. It was the right decision, and don't get me wrong, it was still difficult. Those two things can exist at the same time. You can choose a life and still grieve the one you left. You can be grateful for a new beginning and still feel lonely inside it. You can know that you're moving forward and still miss the version of yourself who knew where everything belonged. Moving countries taught me how much of identity is built from familiarity. The streets you know without checking a map, the language you don't have to translate in your head, the people who remember earlier versions of you, the small rituals you never thought to name because they had always been there. When those things disappear, you become more conscious of the self you have been carrying. And when nobody around you remembers the person you used to be, you begin to ask which parts of that person you still want to carry forward. Starting again was not a clean reinvention. I did not arrive as an empty page. I arrived carrying every previous version of myself. Every achievement, every disappointment, every ambition, every fear, every life I had imagined but had not lived. There is something disorienting about having years of experience that are not immediately visible. You know what you have built, you remember who you were, but the world around you mostly meets the current version, and that can create some uncomfortable questions. Who are you when your history is not obvious? What happens when the career you worked hard to build no longer provides the certainty you expected? How much of ambition comes from desire, and how much of it comes from trying to prove that the difficult years meant something? I do not have perfect answers to those questions. I'm still living inside them, but they became part of why I began writing and why I started this podcast. I started Asli's notebook because I needed somewhere for the thoughts that did not fit anywhere else. I wanted to write about work without pretending work was only strategy, frameworks, and professional victories. I wanted to write about ambition without turning it into a hustle. I wanted to write about creativity without pretending the creative life is always romantic. I wanted to write about identity without forcing every experience into a neat lesson. and I wanted to create the kind of work I often needed earlier in my life. Something intelligent but not cold, something warm but not motivational, something honest about complexity without leaving people feeling hopeless. I have spent many years thinking I was behind. I have watched people with clearer identities move faster and became easier to understand. I have felt the pressure to package myself into one clean sentence. Strategist, marketer, writer, product marketing leader, creator, consultant, maybe one day author. But the more I write, the less interested I become in choosing between them. Perhaps the work is not to select one identity and abandon the others. Perhaps the work is to build an architecture that can hold them all. That is what this notebook is becoming. Not a perfectly optimized personal brand, not a performance of certainty. A body of work, a place where different parts of my thinking can speak to one another. A place where product marketing can sit beside grief. Where strategy can sit beside creativity. Where professional ambition can sit beside the desire for a quiet home, books, cafes, long dinners, and enough time to think. Where we can want meaningful work without asking work to provide every form of meaning. Part of me still worries that this is too broad. That a podcast about work, creativity, identity, games, and ambition will be harder to explain than one built around a single subject. But I think I have spent enough time making myself easier to explain. I would rather create something honest enough to contain the whole pattern. There is one idea underneath many of the questions I want to explore here. I have started calling it sustainable ambition. Not because I have solved it, but because I needed language for a kind of ambition I rarely saw represented. So much of the language around ambition seems to offer only two choices: push harder or give up, become relentless or become content with less, build the biggest possible career or reject ambition altogether. I don't believe those are the only choices. I think many people still want more. They want meaningful work, recognition, creative success, financial security, influence, a larger life. They are simply tired of pursuing those things in ways that require them to sacrifice their health, identity, relationships, or inner life. They do not necessarily want less. They want a form of success that they can survive. That is what sustainable ambition means to me. Not smaller ambition, not a softer word for settling. Ambition that can coexist with a human life. Ambition that understands that energy changes. Bodies change, families need us, grief interrupts us, careers stall, organizations do not always recognize the right people. Confidence disappears and returns. What we want at 40 may not be what we wanted at 25. It wasn't the case for me. The life we are trying to build should be able to hold those realities. I'm interested in people who still want more, but no longer want to destroy themselves proving they deserve it. People who want to become visible without turning themselves into a performance. People who want careers that can hold their complexity. People trying to understand when persistence is brave and when it is keeping them trapped. People who want meaningful careers and meaningful Tuesday afternoons. This podcast will explore those questions, not from the position of someone who has figured everything out. I'm not, and I haven't. From the position of someone who has spent a long time observing the patterns and is finally ready to name them. I'm recording this in Stockholm, after spending the day doing the work I have built a career around, and the evening trying to make room for the work I'm only beginning to claim. I do not know exactly what this podcast will become. That feels important to admit. There's a pressure, when beginning something publicly, to speak as though the entire path is already clear, to define the format, the niche, the promise, the outcome, But most meaningful things do not begin with certainty. They begin as a pattern you cannot stop noticing, a question you keep returning to, a feeling that something inside you needs somewhere to go. I'm beginning this podcast before there's much evidence that anyone is waiting for it, before the audience is large, before I know which episodes will resonate most, before I have a polished answer for where all of this leads, and perhaps that is the most honest way to begin. Certainty is not the price of entry. Sometimes curiosity is enough. Sometimes the need to make something is enough. Sometimes the next version of your life begins before you have any proof that it will work. A body of work is not created in one moment of clarity. It is created through return. You return to the questions. You return to the page. You return to the microphone. You return even when the response is quiet, and slowly the work begins to reveal what it has been trying to become. This podcast is for people whose lives make sense internally even when they look confusing on paper. It is for the person whose career has not followed a clean line. For the ambitious woman who is exhausted by the performance of ambition. For the senior professional who has achieved a great deal and still feels strangely behind. For the generalist who keeps being told to choose. For the creator making something before anyone is paying attention. For the person rebuilding an identity after a move, a loss, a disappointment, or a beginning they did not expect. For anyone trying to create a life with enough room for ambition and softness. Depth and range, work and creativity, recognition and privacy, movement and rest. You do not need to become smaller to become understandable. You do not need to become louder to become visible. You do not need to abandon ambition to protect your humanity, and you do not need to have reached the final version of yourself before you begin speaking. I have spent a great deal of my life searching for the cleanest explanation of who I am, the correct title, the right niche, the one thing that would make everything else make sense. I don't think I'm looking for that anymore. I think I'm building something different. A notebook can hold many things. A strategy, a memory, a question, a story, a half-formed idea, a list of things we are finally ready to admit we want. No single page has to explain the whole person. But over time, taken together, the pages may reveal a pattern. That is what I hope to create here. A record of thinking, changing, noticing, and becoming. And perhaps, as I begin to understand my own mosaic, something here will help you recognize yours. Thank you for being here at the beginning. This is Asli's notebook. Before you go, I would love to leave you with a question. What part of yourself have you been treating as a distraction when it might actually be part of the pattern? Until next time.